Stewardship. I am the Communications Director with the Ranchers Stewardship Alliance. So nice to have you all with us here today. Thank you for coming for this lunch and learn. And as we alluded to as part of the invite for this really is fairly informal. So we hope you have something to eat in front of you, nurture your mind while we go ahead and go through all of this information and hopefully can help out your operation as well. A little bit about our organization before we really get into the meat of the lunch and learn. Ranchers Stewardship Alliance is a rancher-founded, rancher-led nonprofit. Now, we are based technically in Malta, Montana, in Phillips County, and then we help with conservation projects on the ground for both Phillips, Blaine, and Valley counties. And as you'll see if you go through the chat thread for this today, really the education aspect of what we do knows no bounds. The confines of our conservation projects are really determined by the fact that this is big country up here in north central and northeast Montana, and we are a small staff, so we can only get so many places in a day. And Northern Great Plains is really what we cover as far as education, with oftentimes that education going beyond those borders as well. So within the Ranchers Stewardship Alliance, I mentioned conservation. The conservation projects that we do look like investing with conservation cost share for projects that help with infrastructure on a ranch that is also going to add to wildlife habitat. We really work in that space where we understand that responsible ranching and wildlife and conservation, they all work together. So we work closely with numerous partners that are in that quote unquote conservation space to help to spread the funds out to ranchers that could use that for projects on their operation. Could be water projects, something like digging a new well, putting in a pipeline to create more water sources throughout a pasture. A reseed, maybe there's marginal cropland that could get reseeded back to a grass mix that includes native grasses. And then we also do a lot of work with wildlife friendly fencing as well. The education portion, which is what we're here for today, we have a ton on the schedule this year. You can head to our website, ranchstewards.org/events, to get a feel for that. We're kind of towards the end of our winter rush, but by no means getting close to being done just yet. And within education, part of the vision is believing in a future where ranching and rural communities in the Northern Great Plains are so successful that ranch families never need to consider selling or transitioning out of production agriculture. You can see where that very easily fits into what we're doing today with succession planning. Before we do again get into our speakers, want to recognize our sponsors today for helping to bring not only this educational workshop to you, but what we do at RSA throughout the year. They include Vents, the virtual fencing company, Stockman Bank, Montana Livestock Ag Credit, First State Bank, VSETH Cattle Company, AgriBest Feeds, Darren Nordhagen, Bud and Sheila Walsh, and also Ag Spire. We've got a lot of folks joining in. I know there's going to be a lot of questions, and so I'm going to rush right through this so that we can hopefully save enough time for those in the end. Joining us today on our panel, we've got Kurt Barnikoff. He is a retired CPA out of the Havre, Montana area. Also, Ariel Overstreet Adkins. Ariel is our attorney on the panel out of Bluebird Law in Billings. And then Brent Turner. He's a financial advisor and also an author of this book right here, Piece of Land. And if you were involved in our winter book club for RSA, that was what we just talked through a few weeks ago in a really, really nice book club session. So with that, we're going to go ahead and start turning it over to our speakers. Brent, you're first up. We're asking you to set the stage, the big picture. Explain why this topic is important to you and what experience you have with estate planning.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here with you guys. Because if you're here today, you're passionate about agriculture, and I'm passionate about agriculture as well. I grew up on a farm in Tennessee. I got a degree in animal science, and I immediately started my career as a 22-year-old guy that I worked with business owners and doing financial planning for families that own businesses, and I've seen them do a lot of things right, and I've seen them do a lot of things wrong. And when I got involved working with farmers and ranchers, it's a continuation of that same conversation. And I've seen a lot of farmers do things right, and I've seen a lot of farmers do things wrong. And so my passion for agriculture is kind of guiding my business, in that I am passionate about seeing farms and ranches continue. And there's a lot of things that prevent them from not continuing to the next generation. And so I look at most of those obstacles as avoidable. Those are things that we can do, that we can avoid by simply preparing for. And most of the time, if we will focus on the main thing. And so in my work, the very first thing I do when I'm working with a family is to identify what is their main thing. And if their main thing is to keep this business running, this enterprise intact to the next generation, then that's what we do. And we say focused on that main thing. And there's a lot of pitfalls. There's a lot of traps that prevent a family from getting an enterprise moved to the next generation intact. But there's very few of those that can't be worked through with identification, with communication, with preparation. And so putting the tools in the hands of the family to identify what is their main thing, what are the obstacles to prevent that, and then building the system, the process, so that they can have that. And that's a lot of moving parts to that, but they don't need to be so laborious that they prevent you from starting. And so, one of the greatest entrepreneurial coaches in the world is a guy named Dan Sullivan. And Dan Sullivan runs a business called The Strategic Coach. And it is for entrepreneurial people to get better. And one of his greatest quotes is, "You don't have to be perfect. You just need to have progress. Progress, not perfection." And so when you start talking about building a family business to the next generation, don't worry if it's perfect or not. Don't wait for the time when everything has to be just absolutely so before you begin. If you can just get started, that is probably one of the greatest things that you can do for your family. And you're going to run into conflict. You're going to run into taxes. You're going to run into liquidity issues. You're going to run into math. And you're going to run into governance and all kinds of fun things that you don't know anything about yet, but it's okay. There's people out there that like the folks on this panel to help you through that. So, just setting the stage. If you're thinking about, transitioning your enterprise to the next generation, please don't think you have to have it perfect, and don't think that your family is perfect either, or it's not perfect, because in 100% of the families that I've worked with, there has been some degree of conflict. 100%. So if you're not talking to your uncle or talking to your brother or talking to your mom or whatever, I want you to know that's normal. It really is. And it can be an obstacle, but if your goal, your main thing is to have this enterprise run to the next generation, then just because you've got conflict doesn't mean that that's going to go away with a generational transition. So it's extremely expensive to avoid those things or to not deal with them. And so that's kind of when I look at it from a financial perspective, I try to put math with the equation first, because math doesn't have a lot of emotion attached to it, and then we kind of slowly work into the things that could prevent this enterprise from going to the next generation. So I guess if I could leave you with my first parting with this would be focus on the main thing. Don't think you have to have it perfect, and just start with progress.
Great. Brent, thank you so much for being with us. And just kind of some housekeeping for the folks that are attending. What we're going to do is have each of the three panelists introduce themselves. Then they're going to go through a mock exercise. So Brent's going to introduce a theoretical family, at least an unnamed, an anonymous family into the discussion. And Ariel and Kurt and Brent are going to sort of talk through how they might approach that estate plan. And anytime during this, as your questions pop up, feel free to drop them into the chat. Now, this session is being recorded, but that said, we aren't going to verbally say your name over the recording, and it's going to be uploaded to YouTube, but your name won't go along with that question. So it'll just be in the private chat here within the room. And then if you do want to do something anonymously, just go ahead and private message the Ranchers Stewardship Alliance or me on this, and we'll make sure to get your question across as well. We understand that this is a sensitive topic. Up next, we've got Kurt Barnikoff. Now, Kurt, you came out of retirement for us. Thank you so much. Why don't you give us a little bit of your background and the experience you have, why this topic is so near and dear?
Sure, you bet. Thanks for having me here. It's wonderful to get back in front of probably a lot of you that are on this that I worked with and knew when I was drinking my first cups of coffee at my desk rather than on my couch. But yeah, I unlike Brent, I moved to Havre over 40 years ago. Uh, Kind of a city boy from Helena. I did not know the difference between a heifer and a Hereford. Now, I did find out that maybe there is no difference because a heifer can be a Hereford, right? And vice versa. Or maybe there is a difference. But anyway, I had a long career working with a lot of really great clients. It transformed into about 90% farm and ranch clientele. And somewhere around the midpoint of my career, I guess I came to a realization that yeah, doing somebody's tax returns and getting it right and coming up with the answer that they could accept was great, but there was something more to this. There was a need in the farm and ranch clientele that beyond just getting the tax returns done, and somehow I guess I was blessed with a little bit of ability to relate to the farmer rancher and to gain their trust and help guide them through a process of figuring out what's next for their operation. Like Brent indicated, what do they want? Do they want to keep it the way it was? Do they want to change it? Do they want to, in some cases, the answer is they want to sell it and they're just going to diversify and move on. But it's, to starting is the hardest part. And I think that what most people need, and this is in varying degrees, but they need an advocate. They need somebody to help them through the process. And maybe it's just kickstarting it, maybe it's quarterbacking through the whole deal, from start to finish. But that quarterback, that leader of the process needs to. What I've learned is they need to first of all gain the trust of the client, and once they have the trust, then their leadership and their support just naturally comes through, and they have the ability then to challenge the individuals within the client situation, to transform their thoughts and their attitudes and maybe make changes that are necessary to help the whole group move forward. So that's something I learned in the process. It's been very rewarding. Yeah, I did pretty much retire in 1921. Yeah, in 2021. I wasn't always good with numbers, as some of you on the call may be able to relate to. But 2021 full retirement, and then however, I've continued to kind of hang in the background with some stuff. I've been involved with the Montana Grain Growers Association, formally on their board, and now informally, but working with that group to produce some educational material and an educational program at every annual convention. We call it the Dugdale Ag Business Academy. I got some help with some other people. I've been presented with this opportunity to help RSA a little bit, and so hopefully that will move into an ongoing thing. I think I don't have business cards. I'm not out stumping for work to do for compensation, but I'm still absolutely committed to the farmer rancher, and particularly the family farmer rancher, and to help any way I can with the gray hair that I've got and what I've learned over the years. So that's what's going on with me now, and I'm really glad to be here and be able to maybe help you guys.
Well, Kurt, I'm glad you moved from the couch coffee to what I presume is a home office. It was a good shift for the day.
Yep, for sure.
Up next, we've got Ariel Overstreet Adkins joining us. And as I mentioned, she is the attorney on the panel. So, Ariel, give us a little bit more of your background and why this is something that your practice has focused so much on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. And I am a little fresher or newer, or what do you want to say, less experienced than both Kurt and Brent, but really happy to be here. I'm actually going to be it. This year will be my 10th year as an attorney here later in the year. So I can't believe how fast time flies, but it's been really fun. So my background and why this matters to me is that before I became an attorney, I actually worked for the Montana Stockgrowers Association. I was communications director and a lobbyist. And I did that for 5 years. I was just became super passionate about agriculture. In that process, especially, it had been before as well. So after that, I went to law school. And so I found myself on a litigation path, just kind of unexpectedly through law school, and then clerking for a federal judge after law school. I got my first job as an attorney here in Billings for a big firm, and I thought I was going to be a litigator. So I thought I was going to be in the courtroom fighting all the big fights and doing all that. But as it turns out, when you're a brand new attorney, trying to get that time in the courtroom is pretty hard. And so I had to kind of look around for some cases that could get me into the courtroom and get me the experience that I craved. And so I found my way to an area that a lot of attorneys did not like, and that was contested estates and probate. So essentially litigation where families were fighting with one another over the assets of a loved one who had passed away. And so it didn't take me too long to figure out why other attorneys did not like that practice area. It gets pretty nasty. I'm sure many of you have had either direct experience or indirect experience, have heard about how awful things can get when we actually end up in court over these things. But being brand new and naive, probably, I was just really excited to have a space that I could step into, and took on a bunch of these cases. And I really liked them at first. I could handle the emotional piece with the legal side of things. And so I just took a ton on, and no big surprise, it started to wear on me very quickly, where I realized I was just helping families fight to the point that they're never going to speak again. And it really broke my heart. And I had a bit of a breakdown one day where I said, I don't think this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And so having seen what goes wrong, I was able to really reflect and say, hindsight's 2020. If this person had done this thing differently, they could have saved their family a ton of time and stress and money. If these people had planned at all, it would have made a huge difference, and so on. I was able to really kind of mine my experience for some gems, and decided to shift gears pretty significantly and focus instead on estate planning. So take it from the front end, take what I had learned in this court context, in this conflict context, to try to help keep my clients out of court and out of conflict. And so that's my background on that. I've seen all the ways this can go wrong. I have lots of good ideas about how to make this easier for folks. But yeah, I want to make sure we have plenty of time to dive into everybody's questions. So I'll stop there.
Great. Welcome, Ariel. So glad to have you. I noticed she did a really nice dance around the word younger when she was saying the person that
well,
she was on the panel.
I don't feel very young anymore.
Oh, well, Kurt and Brent, she didn't quite call you out so much, but she wanted to. I could feel it. So
Right.
What she lacks in what she has with youth, she sure has made up for in professionalism. I know that. So
Absolutely.
she's really good at what she does.
Absolutely.
And yeah, Ariel, no offense. You as you get older, you'll appreciate that it's good. It's all right to be getting older.
Well, I'm getting quite a bit of gray hair these days. So it just, people assume things when they start to see that gray, don't they? That you know what you're talking about. So I'll take it.
Well, as we enter into the next phase of this panel, Brent's going to go ahead and give us a story that we're going to walk through as a team. And I'm using that word team intentionally, because if you invest much time in educating yourself about an estate plan, you'll realize it's very often a team of professionals that needs to look at this picture for you. It's not just an attorney. It's not just a financial planner. There's lots of different things to consider. And as we often say at RSA, it's really one of those it depends scenarios, because everybody's situation is so varied. So Brent's going to give us one pop-up example of a storyline, and then we're going to kind of talk through that, and then we'll go into the audience questions.
Very good. I think that I'm going to just use an example of a typical, if there is such a thing, but in Montana, we do a lot of livestock. So let's just take a cow calf operation, and that's a lot of the rangeland enterprises that we see with a mom and pop. Let's just take a mom and dad that are living on a ranch that he inherited from his dad. So let's just say that we're probably he's G2 or G3. Let's just say he's G3. Maybe his great granddad settled it, and then he inherited from his dad, and now he's G3. He's generation three, and he's married, and they've got three children. They've got a cow calf operation. They're running about, let's just say 500 mama cows. And right now, the three children are grown. One of them lives down the road and works on the ranch as a not as an owner, but just as an employee. Two of the children have decided that they want to be somewhere else, and they live in the city. Um, they are their net worth with the land and everything is about 20 million. They have not done any preparation for transitioning to the next generation. They have no will. Um, they don't have any trust. The property is owned individually by dad and not with mom's name on it. So it's just owned with dad. And their income with 500 mama cows, they're making, let's say they're making $150,000 a year profit. So they're paying some taxes, but they don't have any cash of sorts. Their income is such that after all the expenses and stuff are paid, they're not able to save a lot, and so but they're making do. They're making it. They're making. So I kind of want to just lay this out there as to that's kind of the stage. Is that an appropriate case you think, Ariel?
Yeah,
Seen
absolutely.
that one? Seen that one before?
Yeah. Yeah.
So kind of what do they need to do? Where do we start with this thing? Where do we start? Because dad is in his 60s now, and mom and the son that lives down the ranch that's a worker there, he's in there day in day out, but the other two are they want them to have their fair share of whatever's left, and they want to transition this to the next generation. So where do we start with that?
Well, I'm happy to jump in if that's okay, Kurt.
Sure. Sure.
Kurt, okay, good. Well, and of course, right, there's so many different entry points. But as an estate planning attorney, my biggest fear in these situations is what could happen if the worst happens. And so I something I like to joke about when I talk about this. Obviously, it's a very heavy topic, but I tell people, I say, this is really important because and I hope I'm not breaking this to anybody on the call for the first time, but you're going to die someday, right? So that's something I just like to say to people, and we don't know when that's going to be. We don't know when you're going to die, what's your family situation is going to be like. So in the ranching context, in the succession planning context, one of my, like, where my chest starts to get really tight is when I hear we have nothing in place. And I'm like, we need to get something in place that's better than what you have now, because having nothing in place, if you die tomorrow, or you die in the next 6 months, this is a disaster waiting to happen. And so that's where, again, I'm an estate planning attorney. When you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail, but I want to get a basic estate plan in place that addresses what happens if you die before everybody's ready. So what can we get in place that's better than what you have now? And then let's start working on as soon as possible. Let's start working on the rest of this, but let's get that plan in place that'll get us a step closer to what we want. So that's where I like to start, Brent. I don't know about your thoughts.
I think it's a great place to start. Sure.
Yeah.
Kurt, what's your thoughts? Where does your mind go with this immediately?
Well, I think Ariel hit the nail on the head there. You know, you need to have something in place if something bad happens quickly, you know, so that you don't have total disruption and chaos. And then beyond that, once that's in place, I always like to start with a conversation with mom and dad initially and find out what, you know, the lay of the land, what their goals are. A lot of the information that you outlined for us, Brent. You know, we find out what kind of money they're making, what they have for assets, and where they think they're going with it, and then get their concurrence to embark on a journey to have discussions with every one of the family members that matters. And in the outline that you gave us, Brent, I would say mom and dad for sure, and then all three kids, the one who's on the ranch and working, as well as the two that are in town and not working on the ranch, and possibly even if those kids have spouses, possibly even their spouses. We don't know if they're involved or if they want to be involved, but just have confidential and pointed discussions with each one of those people and find out what their perspective is on the ranch or the business and the enterprise going forward, and then find out what they would like to see. And you know, one of the fears that I think many farm and ranch family members have is that they're all going to have different and competing ideas about where the business should go and what should happen. And you know, that happens. It happens more than you wanted to, but I think based on my experience, what I most often found was they're more aligned. The people are all more aligned with one another than what they realize. They just don't know it, right? And so anyway, we'd start with that process. Find out what everybody wants and what their perspectives are, and then put it together in again maintaining anonymity and confidentiality for those who shared sensitive thoughts and whatnot, but to bring the whole family together for a meeting and share with them what we heard and identify opportunities for next steps moving forward. That's kind of the way I would start. I would get the people to start going that way and then move forward.
I think those are great. Absolutely, those are great. So we've got a couple of things. I think we all agreed on the main thing. I think we agreed, Kurt, that when you're talking about finding what they want to do, to me that's the main thing, you know, and that's where we start, and then hopefully that's where we end. How do we resolve the issues if there is conflict? And I start with conflict because it's just one of those things that everybody's got, nobody really wants to deal with or talk about. But in this space, in the agricultural succession planning space, there are specialists that deals just exclusively with conflict. I'm not a psychologist. I am trained to identify it, but I'm not trained to treat it. So, but it's a major obstacle. So, how do we start with that? How do we figure out if this conflict is going to create problems for us, either in planning or not planning? How do we deal with it? Ariel, how do you jump in and start working through that with clients?
Yeah, for me, I like to understand all the dynamics, and I like to talk about, especially when I'm meeting with mom and dad, right? If I'm meeting with generation one, I want to talk to them about the kids. I want to know, you know, what do they do? Just some of the information that you gave us. But I also like to ask mom and dad, how do they get along? What big fights have we had in the past? Where have we seen the kids really butt heads? And just I ask about wild cards, like what wild cards are out there? What do we need to know? So I think one of the best ways to address conflict is to figure out what's simmering out there. You have to ask, right? Because we can make assumptions, right? But we don't know. And I think just by asking the questions of the clients, what what's out there that could cause some problems. So that's one of the places I like to start.
Yeah. Bert, what's your thoughts?
Well, you're absolutely right. There's conflict in almost every situation. It's the degree and whether it can be overcome is another matter. I do I do have experiences working with clients where we knew right out of the gate there was significant conflict, and um, I understood as a professional trying to quarterback them through it that I was in way over my head to try to help them resolve that, and we brought in a conflict resolution specialist, and they're out there and they're good. They're not lawyers usually. They're not practicing lawyers. They're not CPAs, but they understand the way humans work and how to diffuse a situation. And they're artful in how they do it. And I think that the one commonality that I've seen there when these professionals do come in is that they establish rapport, then they identify the conflict, and then they in most cases will at least obtain concurrence from the people, from the family members, that it's okay to have a meeting to talk about this and just address the conflicts right up front. And I've seen situations where brothers and sisters are hating each other and they hate their dad, and their dad thinks they hate them, and the resolution specialist takes them through just a process of sharing their thoughts and not just complaining, but saying, Brent, if your dad's not treating you the way you want him to, what does it look like? How would you like to see him treat you? What does it look like to have your dad treating you the way you want to be treated in the business? And just they walk the clients through those conflict resolutions that way, and obtain apologies, obtain acknowledgments of poor behavior, poor attitudes, and really just work it through in a meeting. Because if you don't address those conflicts, if they're serious, then the whole succession plan is going nowhere. If they're that serious, so you gotta get those out of the way, and once you do, then you can kind of get things back on course.
Yeah. So, Ariel, I got a question for you. So, we've got three children, and one wants to farm or a ranch, and the other two, um, they really don't want. They want to come back and visit and see it, and be there for a little while, but they're ready to go back to their life. But we've got a business here to run, and we've got to continue that business even after generation three is over with, is done with it. Where do you start? What do you do to keep that business intact? And yet, that we've got three children here, and there needs to be some division of assets, needs to be some descriptions and some governance around that. Where do you start with that?
Well, honestly, Brent, I tell them to call you. So, one of the things that I think, and the reason that I have them call you is because I want them to have a chance to talk through what it is that they really want, each of the kids, right? And I know that your process is to talk to everybody. And so I don't mean to deflect, but I'm sitting here going, I want to hear from Brent, because I know that a lot of the work that you do is really what sets the foundation, and really gives us the information that we need from the legal perspective to, right? I can do documents all day long, right? But if they're based on a faulty premise, we've made an assumption that this kid wants this and this kid wants this, but we never actually talked to them, then that paper is not worth very much. So if you don't mind, Brent, I want to just kick it back over to you to say, how do you handle these, conversations with these kids to figure out what needs to happen to keep the ranch going?
I look at it from a financial perspective, and I do have confidential individual conversations with every family member. I've already had two this morning. that what's really interesting is I interviewed mom and dad last week, and then I interviewed two of their children, and I'm starting to pick up on a theme. And the theme is that dad's running the ship with a really iron fist, and it's not going over well. And yet I'm looking at this going, hey, we got to figure out how to get dad to a place where he can mentor these youngsters. He can mentor them into how he wants things done, but he also has to come to a place where he has to realize that his archaic methods are probably better served by one of his children. And so what I try to do is to find out what is that unique ability? What is that each child that you have has a different unique ability. And when and this is I use this an example a lot. And so I carry my hats with me. So I've got my CEO hat on, and when I get through being my CEO, then I have to become my COO, and I have to have on my operating hat. And then once we get operating stuff, we got to put our CFO hat on, and we have to make all our financial decisions. And once we get our calves grown or our crop produced, then we got to put on our marketing hat and figure out how we're going to market this stuff. So you wind up wearing all these different hats, and it's pretty cumbersome. So if I can get dad to a place where he starts wearing the CWO hat, and he's the chief wisdom officer, and he's mentoring into the manner of where everybody can whoever's going to be his successor or his next in line with this, that they don't have to go back and relearn everything that he's learned or she's learned. And so that's not a business interruption having to go spend millions of dollars to learn what dad knew. So for me, I start with the finances. I start with who's got unique abilities, so that now when we go to the governance table, we can start building some of that language into it. And so if you've got a couple of kids that don't want to be a part of the ranch, but yet, hey, they may have something that they can do that's not being on the place. They can do that remotely. And if that's a passion or a unique ability or desire of theirs, then let's figure out how to use that.
Yeah, and Kurt, I want to ask you too, in your years of experience, one of this might be cliche at this point, but we talk about this so much. Fair isn't always equal, and equal isn't always fair, right? And I think in a situation like this, where we've got one person on the place, and we've got two off doing something else, how have you seen that play out?
Well, I mean, you took the words right out of my mouth, and it is cliche, but it's a bullseye. I mean, I think in agriculture, probably more so than most other industries, the value of the assets needed to operate the business are so great compared to the net cash flow profit that's generated. If there's a three-way split of mom and dad's estate, to split it equally is going to guarantee financial failure for whoever is operating the ranch going forward. So that's oftentimes a difficult thing for mom and dad to deal with. Usually the younger generation doesn't have an issue with that. They understand. Sometimes mom and dad just say, no, I got to treat my kids equally. And I think one of the roles that I filled and that we as advisors can continue to fill is to help mom and dad understand, if that is their mindset, just help them understand that it's not going to work. And it doesn't take a very big explanation and a cash flow model to prove that. So, I mean, yeah, that's tremendously important. And so I'm sorry, you had a second part of your question and it went away. No, maybe you
I
didn't
don't
have
remember.
a second part.
I don't remember.
That's what happens with the gray hair,
Yeah, yes, it's happening. Well, and I want to just throw in a couple thoughts too, just from a practical perspective, a legal perspective of, there's lots of different ways to do this. And I think that, what Brent's talking about, talk to everybody, find out what what everybody wants, because you might be surprised what people want and what they expect. But from a legal standpoint, there's a lot of ways that we can maybe create some separate things. So a lot of folks in this situation, Brent, I think you said that there's no entity involved. So we don't have a partnership, we don't have an LLC, we don't have a corporation, and that dad owns the land. So mom's not even on the land. So I think that there's some ways that we can talk about, who should own the land now and who should own the land when mom and dad are gone, and then kind of separate from the land ownership, maybe some of the operations. So I like to do that sometimes because we might be able to have some off-ranch kids own a small percentage of the land so that they still have some ownership and some involvement in the ranch, but it's not to such a degree that the on-ranch kid can't afford to make the lease payments or land payments or whatever the case is. And, because everybody's so afraid, well, if they sell someday, that they're going to have this windfall. And so if we can retain some ownership that way without disturbing the business, that can be an option. And then the on-ranch kid can own the full operation side of things. That's one way that I like to approach it sometimes. Brent, what do you think about that?
Oh, I think it's a great idea. Yeah, absolutely. And the other part of that is that I mean, to me, there's 5 areas of succession planning. It's financial planning, it's tax planning, it's conflict planning, it's liquidity planning, and governance planning. And those are the 5, for me, are the 5 pillars. And you have to have all of them. You gotta figure that out. Kurt, the neat thing about where we are today, I put the net worth of this case study at 20 million. We don't have a tax issue anymore.
That's right. We don't have an estate tax issue,
Yeah.
so we don't have to immediately roll into a plan to create entities and fracture the ownership up just to avoid a 40 or 50%
Yeah.
tax on the death of somebody. And that's, if I've seen competent professionals goof up when they're trying to help clients in this arena in the past anyway, it's been an immediate leap to, oh, we have to take mom and dad and put that land into a family limited partnership and create an operating corporation and then bring the life insurance guy in and buy a $10 million second to die policy on mom and dad. So there's liquidity. So everybody is handled. And, they do that before they establish the commonality and an understanding of where everybody wants the business to go. And you might just get lucky and hit the nail on the head with a few of those things, but if you don't take the initial foundational steps that we've already talked about, you have to take those and get through that process before people like Brent and Ariel and the other technicians can go about crafting a plan that works and can give them all a shot of accomplishing what they want to.
Kurt, when you and I started in this business, the federal estate tax exemption was $600,000.
That's right. I didn't think you were that old, Brent.
I've been doing 35 years, man.
Yeah, it was a mess. I mean, and we did see back then, we did see people doing really goofy things, what we would say is goofy today, to try to avoid that estate tax. And the estate tax wasn't 40% back then. It was 50% or higher.
57
And
sometimes.
yeah. And there were people, really, families had to sell their place in order to settle the estate tax. And that was a shame. So yeah, we have a whole lot better environment that way. But I would say we have a lot of other external competitors for the resource of this family ranch here too, right? There's a lot more money floating around in America from investor types that are just sitting there waiting to take this land and put it in their portfolio. There's higher operating costs. There's, I guess, lower, skinnier margins, not for the rancher today. The rancher's got great margins today, but in the farming world,
This year.
Yeah, right.
This year. Haley, how are we doing?
We have had some questions coming in. So if you all are comfortable putting a pin in this discussion,
Yep.
I think what I will do is I'll direct the question to the panelist that I think is the most fitting. But at any point, if the other panelist does have something to add into it, please, by all means, feel free. And so, Kurt, I'm going to direct this first one to you and discussing those quote unquote crazy things that were done by previous generations to try to make things work was one of the discussions that we had in our book club. Different people had these entities that then had to try to be purchased out and stocks had to be bought and all of these things. And that's a very case by case basis. This question specifically, the person wants to know, how do I handle tax implications for the next successor, especially in situations where the steps that were needed or recommended to be done weren't done? So we're here. We didn't do the planning. They use step up basis for example. What do you do for that person that's now just trying to dust up what happened?
Well, you gotta really try and get a handle on what happened and what didn't happen. There needs to be a deep dive by somebody with technical expertise into the tax returns and find out, where the plan fell short. And then once that's determined, which oftentimes that's confusing because taxes are a mystery and stuff gets shoved in the corner and ignored. Way too often when it has a bad potential result. So first of all, figure out what the heck you're dealing with, and then try to develop an alternative or two for how to get out of that box. Most boxes don't have four sides without a door. You can usually get out of a tax mess, given a little bit of time and some competent advice. So that's what I would try to do there, and try to give the family some alternative choices for how to get things back on track so they aren't struggling with a tax result that wasn't anticipated.
Brent, any additional input for that one or Ariel? Okay. So this next question is, what do you do for a single child and their spouse who are actively daily operating? They've had multiple conversations about estate planning, succession, and tax implications, I believe, with the older generation, but there so far has not been a pull trigger action by the current owner or the parent. So you've got the generation two working under generation one. They've talked about it, but nothing is quite prompting any activity. So, how does the child and the current daily operator protect the legacy to keep going when you're not seeing that generation above them really get after it like they should? Brent, this sounds like something to come to your table.
I
Wow.
know. If I can
Go
interject,
ahead.
Brent has a real good answer to this. I would give them Brent's book.
You know, as Kurt and I were just talking about taxes, everybody used to, that was always the perceived killer of of a estate plan. It was taxes are going to just kill us. It's not. It's silence. It's silence is the killer of this deal. And you've talked about it, but we haven't done anything yet. So um, it's all talk and no go. So let's start putting some language in it. So where do you start? After you've already determined who's got desire and what the intentions are, then let's start talking to somebody about putting language to this and putting activity to the thoughts. So I mean it's not taxes going to kill them. It's silence. It's just, hey, we talked about this and we never did do anything, but we really should get back to that. Well, you don't do anything till somebody dies, till an event happens. You know what's worse in these situations? What's worse than death is a loss of cognitive ability, because now you've got somebody that had intentions to do something, and Errol, you can't go back and do things now that just because somebody's, we talked about it, but now they've got Alzheimer's or dementia or something. You can't process that anymore as an attorney, can you?
No, nope. Once we've lost capacity, it makes it pretty hard to do anything, for sure. And especially if
Yeah.
we have nothing, if we don't have a power of attorney or anything at all like that, where we've anticipated, the possibility of incapacity. That's something that I really like to hammer on when I talk to people about estate planning, is it we all think about death when we talk about estate planning, but you also need to think about what happens in the event of incapacity. And so from a legal perspective, thinking about incapacity, and then also, what if we have a really, expensive stay in the nursing home? There's all kinds of stuff there, but I don't want to divert too much from the question, which I think, I get so many people who call my office and they're in this exact situation. And Kurt's answer was really good. I give them Brent's book, because Brent's book, and we're not all here just shilling for Brent, but it's like a really fantastic book that is really easy to read. It's fun to read, and it's this story that I think people can just really see themselves in. And so I encourage a lot of that next generation to just suggest to mom and dad, please read this book. They'll be entertained at the very least. They're going to be entertained. It's an entertaining book, but it also has so many good messages, and maybe, that can be a place, but it can be really hard when we have a generation that doesn't want to talk about it at all. And we've got that next generation that is desperate to know what the plan is going to be, even if things are pretty straightforward. Because I think, Haley, in this example, it was that we just have one kid, but still they one kid is like, I need to know what we're doing. Even if we don't have those off ranch siblings that we're going to need to make sure are taken care of as well.
Did have one question about whether or not this is going to be available after the event. It absolutely is. We're recording this. It's going to be up on the Ranchers Stewardship Alliance YouTube channel. We'll drop that link into the chat, and you'll also get an email with that after the fact. So this one's a pretty straightforward question. We've got somebody wondering, are there any beginning steps that we, as mom and dad, can take before we contact professionals to help to set ourselves up for success? And I'm also thinking, not trying to dig at you guys' daily rates or hourly rates, but it's a lot cheaper if you can get this homework done ahead of time before you enter the space of somebody in the professional capacity. So, Ariel, you've got a family, mom and dad, they're coming in, they want to get this estate plan set up. What do you really appreciate that they have done homework-wise before they enter your door?
Yeah, and we actually have homework that we send out to folks, but if you can really kind of your basic biographical information about the family, who's in the family, who are the kids, maybe just, who are the grandkids, like all of that stuff. If you've thought about who you might like to have in certain roles in the estate plan, if you've identified somebody who's going to take over the ranch, having that information is really helpful. But I think all three of us would tell you that really what can save us a bunch of time is if you have your financial information together. If you have, for me, I'm most interested in what the assets are. What are the assets? Who owns them? How are they? So is it owned by one of the couple? Is it owned by an entity? Those types of things. Do we have any beneficiary designations? I want to know those things. So getting all of that information put together ahead of time can be really helpful for me. I don't know about Brent and Kurt.
Well, I think, there's a lot of the firms, and I think probably Brent, your firm, you probably have some fill in the blank kind of listing of the assets and the pertinent facts. I know, but if you're not dealing with Brent or not dealing with a professional, there is a pretty good resource out there that MSU extension service produces through their Mont Guide publications. There's a Mont Guide that deals with preparing for transferring your business to the next generation, and it takes you through an outline of what do you own, who owns it, what's it worth, what do you want, what are your goals, and depending upon how interactive the family is right now, that's a decent exercise to have everybody go through before you pay any money for anybody. These Mont Guides are free, and they've got a lot of thought that's gone into them. They're good. And the other thing I think to consider is that, and I'm not exactly sure what Brent and Ariel's procedures are in their businesses, but I know when I was practicing, if I started or had a conversation start with somebody who was looking at doing some planning, they're concerned rightfully so, about the cost. And it's not a cheap process to go through, but I would actually invite the farmer rancher to come sit down for an hour, and I would donate. I would just give an hour to them to help work through the process, help them understand what's involved and what they should pull together. And you know, I found that number one, established rapport with the client, got them at ease a little bit, and helped them move on to the next part of the process. Whether they ended up using me or not, it was still valuable. More often than not, they end up using us to work on the project.
So if somebody hasn't done anything, Ariel, as the attorney, I know I'm always heard that if you don't have a plan, the state of Montana will have a plan for you, right? This is all set in motion if you don't have these steps taken. Sometimes if it's a simple deal, you know, one parent, one child, it may go in a lineage that is not that upsetting for the family, although they might have time in probate and you know some waiting there at the end. But where does somebody find that information for what's the worst case scenario if I don't do a darn thing? How is this going to end up? I'm sure that's available somewhere.
Yeah, and I would assume there's a Mont guide for that as well, but I'll just kind of give you a real quick overview of kind of what happens. Yeah, so the Montana law has defaults in place, and for, like you said, even the nuclear family, mom and dad, they've got two kids, whatever the case is, if things go pretty much where we think they're supposed to go. So if one spouse dies, everything to the other spouse. If both spouses die, everything equally between the kids. But if we start to get into these situations where we have blended families with, you know, one parent has kids from a previous relationship, or both have kids from a previous relationship, then those defaults start to get pretty strange, really. So one of the strangest statutes in Montana law is when we have a married couple who does not have children, but the parents are alive. The parent of the decedent is alive. And so there's all of these calculations. There we go. Haley, you put in the Mont guide. Thank you very much for that. So that you can find out. It is so important for you to find out exactly what would happen if you died without a plan in place, because it may be that it would be okay. I mean, you still need to have a plan. If you're a farmer or rancher and you have an ongoing operation, you have to plan. But knowing if the worst happened tomorrow, where it's going to go, that's a great place to start. So that's a great Mont guide. Thanks.
Who knew Montana State University had so many valuable resources we were going to look at today, and easy to access too.
Go, Marcia. Go, Marcia, go.
Yeah, Marcia Getting is tremendous with this, and great to have as a presenter as well. She's got some pretty dramatic examples that she'll bring in. So the next question, and Ariel, I'm gonna go right back to you again on this one. But what happens if a shareholder wills their shares of a closed corporation to a person outside of the corporation?
Okay, so what I'm gathering from that question is that we have some sort of organizational document that says that only certain people can be owners of the corporation. And so, yeah, it depends on what the organizational documents say. So if we have a shareholder agreement, or we have a stock restriction agreement, or a buy-sell agreement, any of those things in place that say what's allowed, we can have some pretty interesting things happen. So it's always going to depend on those documents. If we don't have those documents, there are, again, defaults under Montana law. But a lot of times, what happens is that if ownership transfers to someone who can't have decision-making authority in an entity, then they get what's called a distributional interest. And so they can receive money. So if there are any distributions from the company that year, then they will receive their percentage, but they won't have any ability to have any say. And I've seen that lead to pretty significant litigation and trying to figure out the valuation, especially if we're trying to buy out somebody. We have significant valuation conflict because, of course, one person thinks that interest is much more valuable than the other person thinks it is. But I'm sure both Kurt and Brent have seen this play out. So I want to kick it over to the two of you.
Well,
Go ahead, Kurt.
okay. Well, I think as part of any family business succession plan that is complicated at all, and by that I mean if there's one or two legal entities where ownership is dispersed among family members, I always took the approach that there has to be an ownership agreement or a buy-sell agreement that outlines the rights of all shareholders and defines who can own stock and who can't. And then these agreements have what I always called trigger points that come into effect if certain things happen. If a shareholder dies, if a shareholder gets divorced and is ordered to split off in a property settlement, if a shareholder becomes permanently disabled, and it says who can, number one, what happens, who can own that stock, who can buy it, and what's the price of the stock, and what are the payment terms. And believe it or not, you can, except in the most onerous of examples, a client can determine all of those things, including the price that the shares will transfer, or the ownership will transfer for. There may be some tax consequence, there may be some implied gifting, but this is a farm and ranch ownership group's opportunity to really script what will happen and at what dollar amount when the inevitable happens, when there is death, when there is divorce, when, not that divorce is inevitable, but it happens a lot, and when disability happens. And instead of letting the tail go with the hide, you can take proactive steps and have those documents in place so you are controlling, and and everyone else knows what's going to happen.
I will finish that with this. If the main thing was to keep the enterprise going, if we don't do this kind of work, that enterprise is going to be in severe jeopardy of not continuing. So it's not a matter of cost. It's a matter of, this is real. This business is over, because now they're going to fight about it. And then the courts are going to decide exactly what those values are worth. And you've spent a lot of money that could have been used to grow this enterprise in legal fees that is never coming back to your operation. So, doing something in this instance, to me, is a lot better than doing nothing, because you're going to do something. It just depends on what day you're going to do it.
Yeah, and I want to throw in one more thing on this, Haley. This is a common thing, right, where people think that if they do something in their estate planning documents, that's going to be good enough. And so that's not always the case. So we need to have a really good understanding of our assets and all of these things. When we have corporations or LLCs or partnerships that might be subject to some of these governing documents, these operating documents, our estate plan and what's happening in those documents need to match up. We can't just override them with a will. That's true if we have, a beneficiary designation, let's say on a retirement account or a life insurance policy or something like that. If we have that beneficiary designated, then that actually passes outside of the probate process or anything else if we have a trust in place. So we need to know all of these details so that we can make sure that assets are really going where we want them to, because we cannot override those beneficiary designations with a will. And so I think sometimes people get this idea, I just need a will. I hear that all the time. We have people calling, I just need a will. And it's very rarely that they just need a will. We need to understand this full picture. And then maybe even we need to look at a trust of some kind, depending on the situation. So things are a lot more complicated than people might think that they are. And they think that they're fixing it by having something in the will. And unfortunately, that's not always the case.
Now our questions are coming rapid fire. So I'm going to just start going for you guys. So Brent, this one I think is so important because we've been talking a lot about taxes, paperwork, dotting our I's and crossing our T's. We haven't talked about, do I actually know how to run that tractor or when to move my cows? And so let's speak to that aspect of transition and estate planning that involves more than just these legal and tax
I'm
ramifications.
so glad you asked that because that's a tough one. It's easy, but it's not. So on my phone, I have an app called Otter AI. And I don't know if anybody knows what Otter AI is or not, but it's an app that you talk to. You hit a button and you talk to. And I advise my farmers and ranchers, I say, you know what? When you're going down the road and you're thinking, oh my gosh, this is February and we're about to start calving. Who needs to know what to do? So this is February. I'm Brent. I'm a rancher, and I know that this month I've got to make sure that I've got my mineral lined up. I need to make sure that my calves are ready. I need to make sure that everything's I'm talking to my phone, but what I'm doing there is I'm transferring that wisdom to somebody else. It's so easy. And I encourage my farmers and ranchers to do that. Talk to your phone, tell it what's good. Tell you, just talk. This is a mental note. I'm sharing this wisdom with somebody so that, you know what, come April, they know what to do, you know? And so you're sharing this information. And that is easier than saying, I'm gonna go home and write this down. You know what? It's taking notes for you. So if you don't know how to drive a tractor, if that's in your future, now's a great time to learn. So, but it's again selecting. So genetics in our herds right now is such a big deal. And if one person is doing the genetics, perhaps they spend some time with and mentor somebody that's an obvious person to succeed in that role so that they're not having to go learn what you learned over 20 years. And I look at it from a financial perspective, that is a wealth transfer. That's a major wealth transfer in your department because if you don't have that, there's a wealth transfer away from you because now they've got to go learn that. So I use a couple of tools. I love the Otter AI idea. It's just a note-taking system. It's sharing that wisdom with somebody else so they don't have to go learn it. And they can bring what they know to the mix already. And so, that's just, if you're manufacturing, I don't know, whatever you're manufacturing in a business other than agriculture, somebody needs to know how to do what you do. So that's really putting the team in a place. And I'll say this about that. There's not a bank in Montana, there's not a publicly held company in America that doesn't have a continuity plan. There's already this information because it's so important that that business continues for the depositors in a bank situation. There's got to be, there has to be a continuity plan. Why would we not have a continuity plan with our enterprise that involves agriculture? The same thing. So, having that cheat sheet of skills that you know how to do and transfer that to somebody else just so they don't have to relearn it.
I
Brent,
love that. Yeah, go ahead,
oh,
Ariel.
sorry, Haley. I was just gonna hop in too. I love that tip about just you're in the tractor yourself and you're gonna talk into your phone. There's so much technology that exists today that is not that hard to figure out. I know it feels hard to figure out, but your basic AIs like Chat GPT, you can literally dump in the transcript of your notes and say, help me put this into the format of a standard operating procedure. And it just does it all for you. So I think there's so much that can be done to try to start recording that. I love that tip, Brent.
There you go. That's a future class. I'm also going to say for the old school ones that are really freaked out by tech, just pick up a notebook and start writing it because how cool is it to also have that in the previous generation's handwriting? So I think that that's just a legacy piece too. Okay, next question. I love this because we've had a lot of questions that are very worried about taking care of the older generation. And I think so often we look at succession planning and we think of it as what does that younger generation feel like they deserve or what should they inherit and we aren't giving that honor or we aren't perceiving that honor as much to the generation that stood before them. And so I love that we have these questions coming in. So Kurt, I'm going to throw this one to you. The couple says we know it's clear everything is where everything is going. It's a simple type of a plan. We're next in line. And so the parents are kind of not getting after this too much. But it's more than that. They want to make sure that their parents have dependable income when they retire. They want to make sure that the older generation is taken care of when they decide to take that step. Do you have any suggestions for how to go about that?
Sure. Yeah, I think there's really two parts to that to address future insecurity. One of them is definitely financial. The other is to remain meaningful to the operation and in a mentor stage, and that's a different question, I think. And I know Brent addresses that in his book, but that's probably equally as important as the financial aspect. But on the money end of things, I think that time is on your side. So for mom and dad to have some kind of a nest egg, some kind of money set aside that is separated from the business, that so that when mom and dad want to go spend 3 months in Arizona or want to go on a cruise, they're not dipping into the operating funds to do that. And in the ranching world right now, is there a better time than now to start squirreling away some decent chunks of cash for mom and dad's retirement? No, it's never been better. And you put together even a modest systematic retirement contribution, whether it's to a formal retirement plan or it's just in a side investment fund. But if you do that every year and you do that for enough years and even earning a modest rate of return, there's going to be a meaningful chunk of money there when mom and dad are ready to spend some of it on something other than a new bale feeder or updating the tractor. And that, just from my experience, that's 90% of the battle right there, is getting that fund set up so that there's not pressure on the younger generation and on the business to fund for mom and dad. And Lord knows they've worked hard for a long time and earned it, right?
Ariel, this next question is just screaming you. It's what are the steps that can be taken to protect succession from the nursing home or the hospital?
Yeah. This is a really, really complex question. And so the best answer is the sooner that we can start thinking about this, the better, right? And so why I say that is if we're at an age where we can start thinking about long-term care insurance, now that industry is just in upheaval right now, and it's some of those policies are not as good as they could or should be. But if we're in our 50s, it's time to be thinking about this, okay? And if we can be setting money aside, making that nest egg so that we can private pay, these are our best options, because our worst option is that we're going to have to sell off some assets to pay for care, for private care, or we're going to have to do some trickery to try to get assets out of our estate, so we can basically make ourselves destitute and qualify for Medicaid for long-term care. And these things are all they're risky to me. I don't know that I want to rely on Medicaid for my care. I don't know about anybody else, but because who knows what the future holds? Who knows what's going to happen? But yeah, I mean, so the number one tip is the earlier we can start thinking about this issue, which is a very, very real issue, the better, because we can start to take some steps right now. If we're in that issue where we're getting close and we think that somebody's going to need to qualify, like is going to be in long-term care for a long, long time, there are tools that we can use. Basically, the nutshell is we need to get assets out of the estate at least 5 years before needing to qualify for Medicaid, if that's the route that we're going to go. And of course, that can be accomplished in a number of ways. I would argue that the best way to do that is what's called a Medicaid Asset Protection Trust. Instead of gifting, a lot of people want to gift during lifetime, but Kurt would scream at you, don't do that, because we're going to lose a step up in basis at death, which can be super important for land values and things like that, as we're seeing such growth in those. But it's an irrevocable trust. It's you lose control. There's a lot not to like about it, but if this is something that we're gonna lose the ranch over, this is something we should consider. So there are tools at our disposal, but the sooner you can get working on it, the better.
Kurt, I am going to let you be the one that explains it since Ariel just called you out on it. But let's talk about step up and basis because this is something when you're in the industry, this is just a concept that you know intimately. But for those of us that aren't in your industry, it's sometimes a little bit complex to understand.
Right, right. Oh, I'll give it a shot here. So when somebody dies, their estate, whether it's just held individually or in a revocable trust that is in place before they die, everything in their estate is valued at fair market value as of the date of death. Okay. And that value is what is potentially subject to estate taxes. Now we know in today's world, every U.S. citizen gets a $15 million lifetime exemption against value that could translate into an estate tax. But because the fair market value of somebody's assets is potentially subject to an estate tax, the income tax laws say that those assets at the time of death get a new cost basis equal to that fair market value that's reported in the estate. So that if you have a piece of land that mom and dad paid $100,000 for, and it's worth $1 million when they die, for estate tax purposes, that land is valued at $1 million in their estate. And then going forward for income tax purposes, that land gets a stepped up or an increased cost basis equal to that $1 million. So that if mom or dad dies and their son inherits that land can be sold for whatever, $1 million or $1.1 million, whatever they can get for it. But that whoever's selling the land gets to deduct the $1 million cost basis, the new stepped up cost basis, gets to deduct that against the sale price. And that can be powerful when there is ultimate sales of land. I probably the most significant step up in basis example I ever saw was a large ranch. They ran a yearling operation, and so they were holding most of their calves over, feeding them out, and selling them in the fall of the year as yearlings. And the owner, there's what the old generation, there was only one of them left, but that person owned almost all of the interest in the ranch, died in September when there was, say, 1,000 mother cows. There was 800 yearlings and 900 calves running around out of that ranch, and they were all owned by the rancher when he died. And every one of those assets got a new cost basis equal to the value at the time of his death. The kids that inherited that ranch operation from the father, they did not pay income tax for 5 years because of that. Because all of the yearlings that were sold like a week after dad died, that was tax free. 800 yearlings. And I mean, in today's world, you just do the math. That's massive.
$1 million
Even,
bucks.
yeah, even back then it was massive. So then the calves that were on the ground, those appreciated in value, but still they had a cost basis when they were sold a year later equal to about 2/3 of what they were sold for. And then the mother cows that were all raised, they got an increased cost basis that then the kids could take depreciation on and depreciate them over a 5-year basis. And so there literally was zero tax paid by this very profitable ranch for 5 years.
Our Internal Revenue Service has great guidance on these things. So like go to irs.gov and you type in cost basis and it'll give you the cost basis guide. Page 15 of that tells you exactly everything you just need to know about that. So it's very there. Use those tools. Those are great tools.
Page 15, you've got it down.
I had to look it up last week to share that with somebody. Yeah.
Yeah,
So, Brent, yeah, go ahead, Ariel.
oh, I just wanted to jump in real quick and say I get a lot of questions in the estate planning context of, well, why don't we just give these assets away now? And what Kurt just went through is why not to give it away now. So when you give it away during your lifetime, and Kurt, if I'm misspeaking, please correct me, but you're going to take the person who receives those assets while the first generation is still alive, they're going to take it at that first generation's cost basis instead of getting that step up that they would get after death. And so anytime we're talking about gifting during lifetime, we want to keep that in mind, that there might be pretty significant downside to that lifetime gift.
You're exactly right.
You've given up control.
Absolutely. And you've given up control, and your the person who received it, they could lose it. They could lose it to a judgment, to creditors, to divorce, whatever the case is, right? You're no longer in control, and it gets a little scary sometimes.
Brent, this is going to be my final question of you all of the panel because we're almost out of time. And then I do want you to all go through and give us what would your advice be to the older generation as well as the younger generation before we close out today. So that's going to be your final question. But before the final, this one's a little bit more abstract, and I don't know if we have anybody on the call today in this situation, but we do run into this. And I think as people become further and further out from agriculture, people having smaller families, we're going to witness this one more. So let's throw another hypothetical out there, Brent. Let's say you have a 55-year-old come to you with no heirs, no children, unmarried, thinking, I want to put together a succession plan in case something happens to me and I am to pass earlier than I thought I would, but I don't have an idea for even who this would go to. Do you have any advice for that situation?
I have had one week. I had this same question 4 times. 4 different people called me with this same question. I thought, wow, the stars are lining up on this question for sure. And okay, let's talk first off. I love farming and ranching. Okay, I don't want to see that ranch go away, but I also know that if there's not an apparent heir, that it's going to go. It's going to go somewhere when I'm done with it. I know that there are people in this country that want to farm and ranch in Montana. It's interesting you bring this question to me because I'm actually pursuing this right now, thinking that there's got to be a business model that connects people who need a successor and want to transition this information and this wealth to somebody. And there are people out there that want to be a recipient. And so I don't think it's an exact science, but I know there is a need for that. And I see it so much. And it's hard because finding that right person it's like dating online, I guess. I don't know. But you just don't know what that person is. And so you have to have the will to get your heart broken a time or two to let somebody come and see if this is something that you can work through and work for, and if that's the right person. So I don't know exactly what that looks like, but I just know that there is a need for it, and it's a very common question. And I just think there's got to be a solution to that. But nobody, it's all fun and games, so somebody gets an eye put out. But you just want to, you got to take that chance and go date. Go date on that ranch to see if we can work together and if it's something you want to do. If you're. So I don't know there's a complete answer to that. It is a hypothetical. It's a tough one, but I know there is a need. And I'm actually working with some professionals that do that to try to put together some ideas with that. So, because it's very common. It's very common.
All right. We've got 5 minutes left. Parting thoughts. Kurt, we're going to start with you. Those tips that you would have for somebody in the older generation and the younger generation as they approach succession planning.
Sure. Well, I think for the older generation, actually for both, there will be a transition. You can't do anything to stop death from happening. And so do you want to be in control? And do you want to work with your family, who are probably the closest people to you, and oftentimes your business partners? Do you want to work with them to develop the way the plan is going to shake out, or you want to let someone else take care of that for you? So it's going to happen. And secondly, start talking to one another. If that's difficult, get somebody like Brent or Ariel to help you talk to one another, help you sort out your feelings and your goals and desires. Start the process. It's baby steps. It's risky. The risk is you're going to have some kind of a blow up, some kind of a disagreement, but that could be put back together as long as you're still here. Once you're gone, there's no fixing that, right? So start talking now, get someone to help you if you can't do it on your own, but don't do nothing.
Ariel, for you, any action items that you have or tips for either generation?
Yeah, I mean, Kurt really said it. This is all about having hard conversations, right? And to me, really, it's about leadership. So if you're the older generation, we're going to need to show some leadership qualities, and having leadership sometimes means we've got to have a vision. We need to have clarity, and we need to have some hard conversations. So we're going to have to talk about this. I know, it can be a tendency, and maybe it's this current older generation is not as bad as the previous one, but a lot of people played things pretty close to the vest for whatever reason, right? And didn't say what the estate plan was, didn't tell anybody involved what the plan was. And then that's where we ended up with all of these pretty awful surprises that nobody was anticipating. And so I think the more that we can have transparency, especially when we have kids who have made pretty significant decisions to change the path of their life, to either be on the ranch or off the ranch, let's have some conversations and make sure that everybody's on the same page. So I think for the older generation, I would just encourage, it's hard, right? All of this stuff is hard. Brent, we say this isn't that hard, because in a lot of ways it isn't that hard, but in a lot of ways it is, especially if we haven't grown up in an environment or a culture that encourages these conversations. We're gonna have to do it. We're gonna have to practice, and we're gonna have to be we're gonna have to show each other some grace, because we may not know how to do this well. We might need to do it kind of poorly at first, but we've got to do it. We have to talk amongst the generations. And for the younger generation, I think what I would encourage is, again, the leadership, right? And so sometimes leadership can look like, setting the example. So if you are desperate for your folks to do their estate plan and start talking about succession, do your estate plan. And then you can say, I did this. I have my will or my trust, and I have my power of attorney documents in place. I know if I die tomorrow, I know what's going to happen with what I own. And would you be open to me telling you about my experience? So I think the other thing is one of the things I hear from the older generation about the younger generation is that they're so entitled, right? And I think there's just kind of some of these generational issues, but I think the younger generation, if you can swallow your pride and tell mom and dad, what a big difference that they've made, and what a cool thing they've built, and that you just want to continue to steward it like they have, that can go a long way. So that's what I would offer.
Great. You're way too kind to be an attorney, Ariel. You got a soft heart. All right, Brent, how about you?
Baby steps in progress, not perfection. Just start. Just start. And, don't be, if you get your nose bloody the first time, get up. You're farmers and ranchers. Good grief. Your skin's thicker than that. Get up and go do something, keep trying with this. And try not to be discouraged. We think it's easy because we can see the big picture. And sometimes you can't see the what's going on because of the octopus on your face. You can't see the beautiful ocean. And so let's just start with baby steps. Don't beat yourself up too much, and progress, not perfection. Get started.